Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about data. We're going to talk about the context of data and then also how to classify variables. So I have here a snippet of a data set. It shows us 10 rows, which means that I have 10 individuals within this snippet of a data set. And then across the top, I have the headings, the movie, the month the movie was released, the year the movie was released, the budget in millions of dollars, and the domestic and worldwide gross in millions of dollars. So when we look at data, data is a collection of numbers, characters, images, really anything that provides us information about the sample, which we then hope will allow us to make predictions about the population. And when we look at data, we want to talk about the context of the data. The context would be the who, what, where, when, how type of idea. When I say what is the who of the data, I'm talking about the individuals. So in this case, the who are the movies. Individuals don't always mean that I'm talking about people. So in this case, this data set is about movies. And I'm showing 10 individuals within this data set. When it asks what is being measured, that's asking about the variables. And when I'm seeing a data set like this, I can tell the variables by looking at the column headings. So I have movie as a variable, month, year it was released, budget, domestic gross, and worldwide gross in millions of dollars. So I have 6 variables shown in this data set. It's always good to look at when and where the research was conducted. This is not always something you can see in a math problem, but it is something that's important to see when you're looking at bigger research. The other thing that's really important is looking at the purpose of the study, the survey, or the experiment, especially in today's day of misinformation. You really want to look at who was conducting the study and why were they conducting the study. And then finally, something that you want to look for is a very detailed description of how the survey or the experiment was conducted. Again, not something you typically see in a textbook, but something that's important to pay attention to when you're looking at data. So the biggest thing you're going to do in section 1.2 is talk about how to classify variables. And we have 2 main classifications for variables. We have qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative means we have groupings. A classic one would be here, looking at the month. Those are all grouped. Or we could talk about quantitative. And quantitative are variables that have a measurement to them and a unit to them. So something like budget would be a quantitative. So this would be a good example of qualitative, and this would be a good example of quantitative. So talking more about each one of these, because we have subcategories to both qualitative and quantitative. So looking at qualitative variables. Again, these are variables that can be put into groups. We have 2 types of qualitative variables, nominal and ordinal. Nominal means that there's no order to the grouping. So imagine I have a group of students and I say, what is your favorite color? And we've got yellow, and some people say red, and we've got blue. But there's no ordering to those groups, right? Yellow is not better than blue, is not better than red. That would be an example of a nominal variable. Some other examples here are college major, dog breed, your favorite sport, the city you were born in. Those would all be nominal qualitative variables. Then we also have ordinal qualitative variables. This would mean that there's still a grouping, but there's an order to that grouping. So think about letter grade. So we have A, B, C, D, F. Those are groups, but there is definitely an order to those groups, right? A is better than B is better than C. Likert scale is, when you're asked to give it a 5 if you strongly agree, or 4 if you agree, 3 if you're neutral. That's a Likert scale. It's grouped, and there's an order to that grouping. The thing with the ordinal variables is that there can be inconsistent spacing. So like I know the Likert scale has numbers, so you think of it like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you're asking, why isn't that quantitative? But if you think about what they represent, the strongly agree versus the neutral, the strongly agree versus the neutral, what is the distance between those? And I know that's a strange question, but that's what I mean. There's inconsistent spacing there. You can't really think about it in terms of a distance. Those are definitely categories. And so we don't consider that a quantitative variable. Another type of qualitative variable that your book actually doesn't talk about too much is the identifier variable. The identifier variable is unique to each individual. So your social security number. It's a number, but it doesn't have a unit. It's not a measurement. It's a number that's assigned to you, kind of like a name. And so it's qualitative, but it's unique to you. You're the only one within that group. Another example would be like a student ID or an order number or something like that. The other type of classification that we have is quantitative. And quantitative variables can be measured, and they have units like feet, degrees, money, dollars, and so on. And when I say that it makes sense to calculate statistics, I mean, the big question that I ask myself is, would it make sense to calculate the average of this? Or would that calculation just mean nothing? So there's two types of quantitative variables, discrete and continuous. A discrete quantitative variable is a variable that can be counted. So if I said, how many TVs do you have in your house? You can't have half a TV, right? All the answers are going to be something like 0, 1, 2, 3. That's a discrete quantitative variable. So I have some other examples here. If I said, how many mobile devices do you own? Or what is a white blood cell count? It doesn't make sense to have half of those units. A continuous quantitative variable can assume any value. So if I say, how tall are you? Now I might say I'm 5 feet 4 inches tall, but that's rounded. That's a rounded number. I can still be 5.367892 feet tall. I almost said inches, feet tall. So that would be a continuous quantitative variable. So height, the cost of something, weight, anything that's measured in a length. So I put circumference here, but anything that's measured in a length would be a continuous quantitative variable. So I just want to make a quick note about being careful about the context when deciding whether or not variables are qualitative or quantitative. So one example here I have is age. Normally, if I just said I collected the age of the individuals, people would assume that it's quantitative because they're assuming that I'm saying, how old are you? So they would say like 30 or 5 or something like that. And I would have a quantitative variable where the units were years old, and calculating an average of an age would make sense. I could find the average of people, or average age of people. But it is also possible to talk about age in terms of qualitative. I could give age a category. I could say infant, toddler, elementary school age, teenager, senior citizen, middle-aged. Those are categories when I'm talking about age. So it is important that you think about the context before you assign quantitative versus qualitative classification. The other warning I want to give you is, I kind of hinted at this previously, is be careful about numbers. Just because something is a number does not automatically make it quantitative. So I used Social Security number before. Social Security number does not have a unit to it. There's no measurement there. There's a system for how it's assigned, but it's not a measurement. And it would make no sense to find the average social security number for a group of people. Another example would be your zip code. So the zip code of where you live, that's a number, but it has no unit. And if I took all the zip codes and found an average, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make sense. So a zip code is an example of something that is numerical, but it is a qualitative variable.